Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here. I'm Steve Costello once more with my co-presenter, Leo Farberg, two psychologists with stuff to talk about, is one way of putting it. Today, we're going to be talking about triggers. Triggers, what on earth are triggers? Leo, do you want to give us a quick trigger definition?
Well, triggers are now all over the place. Everybody is talking about trigger warning and being triggered by something or somebody. And basically, a trigger is some stimulus that kind of provokes you to react, and usually it's thought in a negative way. That you kind of have a negative reaction. So I think we have a lot to talk about because there are some like pop culture meaning or notion of trigger, and probably we want to try to put it closer to what it really is and how to deal with them mostly.
Yeah. I think as well, thanks, Leo, in relation to triggers, there are some myths as well. You know, you mentioned pop culture already, but one myth, I use the phrase myth, the word myth quite lightly, is that the other person, another person, is not the trigger. Something they say may trigger something, but it's not the other person. It's something in you, something in me, something in Leo that triggers. And it's one of those things that often waits in the dark for opportunities to strike. I was doing some thinking on this a couple of days ago, and I had this image of a kind of bright eyes in a completely black room, looking for an opportunity, you know, waiting for the right thing, the right trigger. So one of the things that triggers do is that they affect our ability to remain present in the moment. And another thing that, so mindfulness talks about being present in the moment, this moment. But that's one of the things that triggers do. They take us out of the present moment. But they also put us on the defensive. So we kind of go into a defensive mode. And I'm sure you've all heard of fight and flight, or I often say fright and flight. You know, something happens, we get scared, we run for cover. You know, and this is something that a trigger can do to us. So we could look at a trigger a little bit like a starting pistol for an emotion. So certain situations activate our emotions. So the death of somebody, we've talked about bereavement and loss the last couple of weeks. The death of somebody, obviously that's going to hurt our emotions. It's going to make us sad, perhaps. And there are other emotions that we might feel. But let's just stick with sadness for now to keep it simple. So every time we're reminded that that person died, we're triggered to have that emotion of sadness and maybe other emotions, like I said a minute ago. So that's what triggers do to us. The important thing to know about triggers is that these are very real experiences, and they remind us of traumatic experiences. Triggers are not simply things we don't like. So here's an example. I don't like violent movies, period. I just don't like them. So when I see you see the little words on the movie credit or before the movie, this movie contains violence, I often think, nah, I don't really want to watch that one. Not interested. It's not a trigger. It's more of a popular culture trigger. You know, it's something that I just don't enjoy, violent movies. I've never had trauma that's violence related in my life. So there is no trigger there. It's just a feeling. It's something that I happen not to like. Do you want to elaborate on that, Leo, or are you good with what I just said?
Yeah, I'm perfectly good with what you're saying, but I probably have to add that it's the reaction that our nervous system chooses for us. It's not our mindful reaction. It's the situation, or maybe some slight uh, something reminding of an old situation where a kind of trauma or some other type of some memorable thing happened. And next time the nervous system, if it's stuck to this situation or to the circumstances, it gives this kind of like it's wired to give the reaction. It's not something you decide to do. Uh, it's your nervous system, and they might be the slightest moves or figures or smells or something that provoke a reaction, and then you notice the reaction.
Yeah, brilliant. I was just the reason why I asked you that question is that I had an image in my head of me balancing along a knife edge, because one of the things that you just kind of said it in your response, one of the things about triggers is that they can influence our behavior or generate specific thoughts. They can also cause pain. How many people think, dear listeners, think about this. How many people do you know who, for example, say, I've got a migraine, and they've got a migraine because they've been stressed by something. Something has triggered that migraine. Something that happened today triggered it. It made it happen. It's not magic. It's about the way we think about things. It's about the way our nervous system responds. And the nervous system, of course, has an effect upon the body. We often talk about what's going on in the mind, but we really do need to remember that there's more than the mind at work. There's bits of the body that also work in relation to the same thing, in relation to the same triggers, for example. So we could spend a few weeks on that subject. I'm thinking.
Sure.
I'm not going to do that today, though. So triggers can be internal things that are coming up in our minds. Sometimes a trigger can be a feeling. You suddenly feel all tense, all wound up, all tight. Your fingers start to hurt. I just mentioned the headaches, the migraines. You suddenly get a migraine. You're not immediately aware of where it came from, perhaps. So our body is amazing at telling us that the world around us is not quite right at this particular moment in time. And a couple of weeks ago, and this is just another sort of thing that can trigger us, I talked about the memory of a person who passed away. Not from my point of view, this was somebody else's example. And what happened was that somebody's dad had died, and some months later, he noticed a smell of pipe tobacco, which was the same pipe tobacco that his dad had used when he was alive. The smell of that tobacco triggered an emotional response, and he broke down and cried because of the smell of the tobacco, which I think is fascinating. But it goes to show how our olfactory memories, or smell memories, are lodged, and they're just waiting. That analogy I gave at the beginning, waiting in the dark for that smell of the pipe tobacco. Remember that. And now there's a trigger. Okay. So that's a couple of ways that we can be triggered. So events can become triggers as well, particular types of event. So when we're reminded of our own traumas, and those traumas might include loss, I just mentioned that, loss, bereavement, the loss of a job or a career, a relationship breakup of one form or another, physical assault, that can create the same thing. So for example, my idea of I don't like violent movies, for me it's just I don't like violent movies, but somebody who's been physically assaulted may find great difficulty with violent movies because it's going to trigger the memories of that trauma. And of course, there's emotional abuse as well. Leo, do you want to focus on any of those for a minute?
Well, trauma is also a big issue right now because so many experts are revealing the issue of trauma and the mechanisms of the body, and that so many people are really traumatized by different events in their personal lives and broader or big social events, family history. There are so many levels of trauma, and more people are talking about it, but it's not like and triggers are basically a sign of some traumatic memory taking place. And the thing about triggers is that, well, the thing about trauma is it's something, if you feel or know about yourself, it's something to be processed. It's not something to be kept inside or to keep suffering with. It's something that so many studies and practical therapy, practical counseling show that it is curable. It's something which is possible to be changed. And triggers are basically the signals. It's not the person who said something and you had the reaction uh, to blame. Well, sometimes there are people who use what we call our red buttons, who push them on purpose, and it's another story. But sometimes people don't mean, or situations are not that threatening as they seem, but your brain, your limbic system perceives them as threatening, or perceives somebody's words or actions as threatening, or reminding you of that old story. And basically, most of the time, people or situations are not to blame. But if you feel triggered, if you watch something on the news and feel reactive, if you talk to somebody and react to their words or actions, it's the signal. It's not, again, not to blame the person who said that, but to notice and take care of it. If you have an some tools to work this through, it's great. If you don't, it's very important to get a set of tools to take care of yourself. And with a good therapist or good counselor, more and more people, more and more professionals are now more going like deeper into trauma and the treatment of trauma. It's necessary to take care of it.
Yeah, right. So we can't just ignore the triggers and bury our heads in the sand. That seemed like a good way out, but it's not going to work, is it? Not really.
It's no use go like in circles and get triggered all over again. As soon as you find a trigger, with something that triggers you, it's not just disabling the trigger, it's disabling the red button where it pokes.
Yeah. So just before I've got another question that I'm probably going to ask myself. I'm not going to be mean and throw it at you, Leo. So before I ask that question, I just want to remind everybody listening and watching today, please, if you've got a question, let us know what the question is and we will answer it for you. If it's a big question and it's going to take some time to answer, no problem, we'll tell you that, but we'll make sure we get you an answer perhaps in the next episode the following week or the week after that, whatever is appropriate. Okay, so please ask your questions. Are triggers overrated? This came up when I was writing some notes the other day. Are triggers overrated? But there's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek. It's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek question, really, because one of the things that struck me is that there are so many trigger warnings out there today. If you look on the back of a book, it'll tell you whether there's going to be sexual violence in it. It'll tell you if there's going to be suicide. If you watch a movie, it'll tell you all those things before the movie gets started. if you look at a post on the internet, if there's going to be some kind of explicit content in the post, it'll tell you that. If you post something to YouTube, it will ask you, is this content appropriate for children and young people? You know, so there's all kinds of warnings around that apparently relate to triggers. But I think one of the things we've just said in just to shorten it all a little bit is that there are pop culture triggers, and these are the triggers that we think we're being triggered when really we're not. We're just being warned of what's coming up. You know, there's no trigger in there, and there's no intention to trigger people. That's the important thing as well. You know, so there is a lot of popular culture triggers, but what can we do about those, Leo? How can we get around, you know, if violence really did trigger me, it relates back to some trauma, what can I do about it?
Well, the first thing is find someone to share, or because the best way to regulate yourself is to find a company, find someone who will. It's not necessarily talking about it. Sometimes it's good to share and say, okay, I saw that and that on the news, and it triggered so many thoughts and emotions. But sometimes it's just spend time with someone calm and strong and grounded, and get grounded with the help of somebody in your circle. Then I've already mentioned that basically I think that everybody has to build up a toolbox of different exercises and ways to ground themselves, ourselves, and uh, take care of our mental health and physical health. And caring about physical health is also a good idea, because nervous system lives in your body. If you feed it in an appropriate way, or like use substances that destroy it, then probably it will be more vulnerable to triggers. So, and sleep is very important. You can skip that. uh, I also think that it's nice to have a good, uh, at least a support group. There are so many types of support groups, and it's cheap, or probably a free way to have a company of people at the same place you are, and probably an idea of personal therapy or counseling. It depends on how uh, problematic you feel your situation is. Uh, it's not like something extra. I think it's normal these days to take care of your personal mental health, because it's very hard to avoid triggers. We're now living in a world overloaded with information. You can like scroll on internet and see somebody's post, or you can read a neutral like article or paper, and then you can see a commercial on like on the side, which on the sidebar that says, or that shows something explicit or triggers something in you. So well, right now the news are overloaded with all different terrible stuff about war and economical crisis and whatever. If it triggers you, don't watch. I don't. I don't like it. And it sometimes does trigger some anger in me or whatever. But I chose not to watch the news, and I'm quite comfortable with that. So take care of your comfort.
Yeah.
You cannot ban the news, because they won't get any ratings if they are like nice and shiny.
Yeah. I was just going to talk about for a minute dissociation or disconnection. But I think we do need to do that. We'll do it in a minute. But I just noticed there are at least 3 questions coming in. So let's have a look at those. But before I do that, I just need to tell you about a little comment. We have a house guest at the moment, and she was talking about mental health a couple of days ago. And I asked her, I suddenly remembered that I know somebody who lives near the place that she comes from. So I just said, hey, how's Ben? And she said, oh, he's good. He's taking care of his mental health right now, which was wonderful to hear that,
Mhm.
because 20 years ago, you wouldn't often have heard people say, he's taking care of his mental health right now, because it wasn't discussed in the same way that it is discussed today. I think there are still some barriers and some blocks to being able to talk about it in some places, but it's getting better, and it's fantastic, because that is certainly something we need to be doing. If we're triggered, if we have a trigger that relates to a trauma from the past, one of the best things we can do is talk about it. So Marie asks, are triggers danger? Is there a danger in triggers? So what do you think, Leo?
Well, it again, triggers are not dangerous by themselves. Your reactions may be dangerous, especially if it's difficult and deeply buried or suppressed trauma. Uh, there are cases when people go suicidal or psychotic after something, and the triggers are usually quite extensive. They're not just not usually just watching on the news, but if the watching of the news or hearing somebody's story straightly correlates with something you suffered, it might be a sexual abuse issue, it might be violence, it might be losing people in war zone, I mean, close or being a witness to some violence. They're very hard things to process, and the reaction to such a trigger may be dangerous. It's true, but
Yeah,
it's thanks God quite a rare issue. But still, you have to take care of yourself, because sometimes people do not remember their trauma at all. It's a specific way how psyche takes care of itself. It tends to hide stuff. But if you suffer depression or depressive symptoms or some other uncomfortable problems in the mental health field, I think you better take care of it again. And I keep repeating, take care in advance. Don't wait for something to provoke you.
yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to put the next two questions together because they're kind of related. So Rob asked, is watching something, can
Watch
that cause a
TV.
trigger? Yes, so watch TV or whatever. So, and Mark goes on to say, can triggers cause depression? I think, Leo, you answered that in your last response by talking, and I answered it last week, although these guys may not have been here last week, where we talk about things. It's not the things, as long as they're not physical, it's not the things that are causing harm, it's the way we think about things, the way we look at the things with our mind and our experience and all those things. So that is where the harm begins to come in. So as a trigger, a violent movie, that doesn't harm me. It just makes me say, no thanks, I don't want that. But there's no harm. There can never be any harm. Even if I had a trauma about violence, the movie isn't, that's not the thing that causes the pain, that causes the hurt. The trigger isn't the thing. The trigger just starts a process. Perhaps that's a fair way to put it. So do you want to add to that, Leo?
Well, probably just a kind of uh, general thing that not triggers cause symptoms, and they do not cause depression, but they, again, their reaction of the nervous system can be overloading and probably lead to a later development of some disturbing reaction, such as depression. If
Yeah.
it's too much, it's overloading your nervous system, then it can bring, but it's not the trigger itself. It's the reaction. You have to differentiate it.
Yeah, I think a good way to explain that is what happened to me some years ago. So I had an accident, couldn't walk very well, blah, blah, blah. Ended up in a wheelchair. Things got bad, things got dark. I lost my job. So a load of things made me feel in the beginning a little bit angry, a little bit frustrated, a little bit lost, a little bit unsure of where I was going to go next. All those things together ultimately created what was diagnosed as depression. But it wasn't any one thing. It wasn't any one trigger that did it. It was a whole host of things flying around in my head that I didn't have the answers for, which I always used to think was a little bit crazy. A psychologist didn't have the answers to what was going on up here. We too need support sometimes. So there's another question that I think is quite important. I was going to move on, but I don't want to do that right now. Michelle is asking, why are memories of my past trauma coming back now? Well, it's a difficult question to answer without having Michelle sitting here in the studio with us. And that is something that our producer, Steve Beer, is working on, having a panel of people in the studio. So why are Michelle's memories of past trauma coming back now? Are we reminding Michelle of the trauma? Are we reminding Michelle of the trigger word? She's probably aware of what triggers her trauma, her past trauma, or memories of it. So where can we go with this, Leo? What's the best thing we can do?
I think I think if Michelle, if you want to add more, maybe ask a question and maybe ask a private question, you can contact us on with any of the contacts which we provide throughout the this talk, and you can contact Steve or me if you want a kind of explanation or with your personal detail. But basically, trauma is a memory issue. It's an emotional and memory issue. The place or the part of the brain which is affected, and it's when your memories are frozen in the moment of trauma. Again, the system is overloaded, and it like glues to to that moment, and that's basically the thing. It's trauma. But if you have a bad experience, it wasn't so nice, or it was hurtful, or whatever. But if you processed it and it's just a memory, at that time I was like so many years old and this shit happens to me, but it's a memory, and it's there. But trauma is something that gets frozen over there and keeps moving with you, whatever age you are now. So that's why our flashbacks, that's why our these sharp like overrated reactions to stimuli, because your mind, your subconscious mind still thinks you are in that situation. It's frozen over there.
Yeah, I think that's a great phrase. The subconscious mind is still over there in that situation or that place. Certainly, in the example I gave you about myself, my mind was still sitting on the floor on a bridge where I broke my left kneecap. You know, it didn't move on. It took a very long time to get off that bridge. You know, sometimes we have to work at it. And that's, as Leo mentioned, maybe sometimes we do need to look at therapy. Now, that's easy for me to say as a therapist, and easy for Leo to say, but it's absolutely essential that if we need support, we need to be able to say, help, I need support. It's crucial. It's crucial to our well-being. You know, it's crucial to our future. I don't want to carry that baggage around with me, those triggers, those past traumas, and all those things. And that's what I say to my clients. Do you really want to carry that baggage? And most of them say an absolute no, absolutely not. Some say, well, I would like to get rid of it, but I don't know what to do. They feel defeated. So my role is to help them, and it's almost as though they've fallen down a rabbit hole. And my role is to kind of pull them gently out of that rabbit hole. No harm intended. So there's individual therapy. We mentioned last week as well, there's group therapy. Group therapy is great for people who want to share an experience in a group. So people are sharing their own experiences. You learn quite a lot from other people's experiences, especially when you've got a couple of psychologists looking after the group to make sure that we're making the best of what people share. But the other thing that's important, and I was asked this quite bluntly recently, what's the difference in cost? And that's a fair question. It's a great question. The difference in cost is that it's about a third cheaper to be a member of a group as opposed to individual therapy sessions, about a third. So we're not talking an exact science here. It depends on who you're talking to, which therapist, and so on. So there are a couple of things to think about. The other thing about group therapy as well is that wait times are considerably shorter too. I had a conversation with a new client a few days ago who'd been waiting for more than 6 months to get an appointment with somebody. She found me eventually, and I found a gap because somebody had finished. But she'd been waiting such a long time. Now with groups, it's easier to get people into a group. There are not many groups, but we have spaces and we can take 10 or 12 people, for example, into that group. So it's positive. So
we've got a question there.
I've just seen it. I read it together. How to recognize if your childhood trauma is affecting you. Do you want me to go with this? I'd quite like to go with this one.
Will you? Because
I will.
I'm always happy to talk about trauma. It's not just
I know
happiness,
you are.
but I
Exactly.
love this topic. And find it very important. So go on.
Childhood. I can't get the words out. Childhood trauma. How to recognize if it's affecting you. Here's a good example. There was a young woman who felt that she couldn't communicate. She also felt that nobody was listening to her when she tried to communicate. And she was is a likable person. She's not somebody you would find aggressive in her mannerisms or anything like that. She's a nice person. But she couldn't communicate and felt that nobody was listening to her. So we did some digging into that. We used cognitive behavioral therapy to go back into her childhood and find out what went wrong. Because I felt there was something there that was stopping her from communicating. And sure enough, we did find something, and it seemed very, very tiny and almost insignificant. But her father had ignored a little project she'd been doing that she was quite proud of. And all she wanted was to get him to listen to her sing part of the song. And he kept saying, no, can't do that, too busy. And that affected her at that time. She was quite young, I think 5 years old. Following that particular incident, other incidents happened, similar incidents, not the same, similar. And eventually they built upon each other and so on, until it became a situation where she said, I am a terrible communicator. I cannot communicate. And who wants to listen to me anyway? She thoroughly believed that. So she'd had a tiny minor trauma at the beginning and had a few other things that she would define as trauma along the way of her life, her childhood in particular. And she turned out to be a bad communicator. The reality of that, a bad communicator, was untrue. She actually turned out to be an amazing communicator who had a fantastic business that was doing extremely well. She was making, if you want to measure doing extremely well by earning a lot of money, she was doing extremely well. She had wonderful staff teams, 3 teams at 3 locations. who loved what they did, loved working for it, and didn't want to go work anywhere else. There are other examples that come into that whole picture. So she didn't recognize that childhood trauma because she built on it. She collected, you could say almost that she collected experiences and they all merged together. They became a massive tangled ball of wool that she couldn't unravel. She didn't know where to start. So where do we start with this, Leo? Okay, I mentioned CBT, but there are other ways that we can.
Well, I can add on. I mean, the question how to recognize if your childhood trauma is affecting you. Well, there are different types of trauma, and usually, what I would pay attention to is if you feel inadequate, if you feel kind of small in the situation, or feel very reactive, you have to search for the traces of trauma and again deal with it and take care of it, not in the moment, but generally. So if you feel like it's being free from childhood trauma doesn't mean that everything is easy and happy and fine. Shit happens, and you can get bad days and bad experience. But when you are able to process and deal with it, that means that the signs of your childhood trauma are leaving you. So basically, again, what we all keep talking about is that people deserve to be happy and healthy and to get moving and not being stuck in some old story. And that's the main reason so many, well, people are trying to help each other right now professionally and uh, just as volunteers. So if we are talking about the way you are or the mm, again tools to deal with trauma, well, again, basically trauma is a physiological state, and it yes, it's provoked by psychological and social circumstances, or it's made through our social communication with our relatives, close ones, but it's basically physiological. So CBT is like a open gate. You get in and start discussing thing. Many people cannot discuss thing. They feel they freak out when it comes to discussing things. Many people do not remember their early trauma because it was too early before they could talk or remember and analyze things. It's another reason why trauma is there, because something happened too much too soon. You couldn't process it because you were very young. And then there are some kind of, well, different terms may be used, but it's going deeper, like as if the brain was a staircase, and you can go from CBT, it's the upper stair, and then you go down and down. There are different tools to pick the trauma like deeper and deeper from your brain. And then there is a bottom up approach when you just think physiology, like breathing or exercise, and again physical care and nutrition and sleep, and you start taking care of your body and nervous system and learn tools that help to you calm down and uh, uh, like calm the worrying symptoms down, like the activated part, and also promote that part of the nervous system that is responsible for calming down, rest and digest, and communication, and expressing yourself. So all types of therapy, there is not no one type of therapy that works. It's more a variety of tools, but when the thing is that a therapist should have several of them to see what's better for you right now in this moment or in this period of therapy.
Yeah.
Sometimes talking takes like a year or two, and sometimes it doesn't help because just talking over the trauma it's mostly like revitalizing this trauma over and over again. And but you have
Giving it
to
airspace.
process it, and sometimes it's better not to talk, but to do other types of work.
Yeah, brilliant. I think one of the interesting things that I'm a big supporter of positive psychology. And one of the things in positive psychology is that you're not broken, and you don't. It's not that you need fixing. We've all had our experiences. These experiences have affected some of us in quite a big way, in a big and profound way. Other people might have a similar experience and say, "Yeah, sure, I'm fine," and off they go, and they're happy. But other people aren't, and it's not because that people who aren't are broken. So the start point is, what's your experience and how is it affecting you? And now let's look at what we can do to change some of that. And like Leo said, there's a lot of things we can do. It's not one thing, it's not two things, it might be more for some people. The communication situation I talked about a few minutes ago, we managed that with CBT and some talk. But we didn't need anything else because we got up and down those stairs within about 3 months in that particular case. It can take a lot longer. It depends. It depends on too much. We can't give any definitive answers. I just want to go back, though, to something I was going to talk about earlier. We've got a couple of other questions that really we're probably going to answer within what we're going to be talking about. But I'll make sure that we do. If we don't, I'm going to go back to them, or I'll send Leo back to them, whatever. So I was going to talk about dissociation or disconnection from our memories earlier, because it is one of the things that sometimes people do. They dissociate with the traumatic memory. They don't want to confront any of that stuff. So I used the phrase earlier, they try to bury their heads in the sand. Unfortunately, the triggers still exist out there, and the triggers come back and haunt them. They pop up out of the dark when they're least expected, and they go back to where they started from, being in fear and scared of what's happening to them, or angry or depressed. There's a lot of emotions that they can feel because of these triggers. And sometimes, as Leo said before, the triggers can become very serious in that they affect behaviors. They can affect behaviors. And that's all about how we think about things. So we've got to be really careful that we learn to recognize when we don't feel right. It's okay to say, it's good to say, help. I don't understand this. Help. This is making me feel angry or lost or whatever it happens to make you feel. That's really important. So when a trigger comes up, maybe a good way to begin with is just stop for a minute. Just stop. Stop what you're doing. Allow it to be. Just breathe. Just focus on breathing. Breathing isn't a magical. It's not something that fixes a challenge, but it's something that just stops us and helps us get back to the moment, this particular moment. So if we focus on our breathing just for a minute, just breathe in gently and hold the breath, gently push the breath out, and just repeat that cycle. And then see what happens when you go back to what you were doing. You might get some good ideas whilst you're doing that breathing, grounding process. But just have a think about it. That's just one simple tool, breathing. We breathe all the time. Some of us breathe very badly. I know when I get a little bit stressed, my breathing goes off the chart, wrong direction, and I've got to pull it back. So just think about that. Think about your breathing. So what about let's just go to this question from Wendy, because this is bothering me a little bit. What is the biggest trauma? Wendy asks. Well, without being flippant, my biggest trauma is not going to be Wendy's biggest trauma. And it won't be Leo's either. Leo's biggest trauma I might well understand it, but it's not going to be my biggest trauma. It's a very personal thing, isn't it? So do you want to add something in there, Leo?
Yeah, trauma is not evaluated by the situation you were in. It's not something that happened to you. It's something that happened within you. How, again, your nervous system reacted and whether it was overloaded and shocked and frozen in the moment, or you had an opportunity to process the experience. Trauma can be kind of three main types. It's too much too soon, and I mentioned it. It's too much, but your system couldn't go through it. Maybe it might be a systematic harm, something doing bad things to you, and like little strokes fell great oaks. And another thing is not having something appropriate in a sensitive time. For example, very many people suffer now from anxiety and depression, and you can trace uh, um, the trauma or the experience they're having now and this period of time to the being babies not picked up and fed on demand, but they were babies picked up like once in 3 hours, as Dr. Spoke promoted, told the mothers, and many pediatricians did that because they believed it was true. But babies laying in their cots and suffering from because they don't suffer from hunger, they suffer all over, they hurt. And right now, this epidemic of depression, anxiety, and nutritional and food intake issues, it's might be traced to this very widely spread practice with babies, and it's a trauma.
Yeah.
So there's no such measure of objective measure of a trauma from the standpoint of the situation it was.
Yeah, sure. I think something that we haven't so far mentioned is we've mentioned looking for help if you think you're triggered by certain things and you're not managing them. I can't speak now. We're not managing them very well. But we should also note that triggers may produce psychiatric symptoms in some people. And that's going to require specialist intervention, i.e. a psychiatrist perhaps. Now, a good therapist will be able to guide you without a doubt. So please, if you feel that there are symptoms that you're not sure what they mean, or they're causing you to note that your behavior is a little bit offline, then mention it to somebody. If you can't mention it to Leo or I via message, mention it to a GP, a general practitioner, doctor, an MD in the US, wherever you happen to be. So think about talking to somebody and telling somebody. Don't suffer it in silence. Don't allow it to take more control than it already has. Okay. If we've got time, and I know time is, I'm just going to check. Yeah, we've got about 10 minutes. Let's think for a minute about thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. So I have a thought that I don't like something that Leo just said to me, for example. It's not true. I'm just using it because he's the guy in front of me. So I don't like something Leo just said to me. That creates a feeling of sadness because he's a colleague and friend. And that might create a behavior. And the behavior could be, I'm going to ignore Leo for the next couple of days. I'm not going to speak to him. Okay, we're having a little bit of fun with this now. So thoughts lead to feelings, and feelings lead to behaviors. And then it goes around some more. So from behaviors, we go back to thoughts. Well, my behavior of ignoring Leo's not getting me anywhere. What else can I do to punish him for saying something mean to me, for example? That gives a feeling of, oh my, perhaps I'm being a little bit mean about this. And that gives new behavior where I might try and make up with Leo. so that it all ended well. But sometimes our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors loop so many times around that we get lost. We forget what the original, as I mentioned earlier, what the original trauma might have been. We forget where we were and what we were trying to do about it, because we've had so many thoughts, feelings, and behaviors looping around that suddenly we're kind of sitting in a minefield and we don't know how to unpick it all and sort it all out. So we need to find a way to break the cycle. So, Leo, can you think of a way? I've got a couple of examples of little exercises that we can use.
Well, yeah, all the cycles that bring us to some disturbing situations have to be broken, because there are so many cycles described in psychology, but the trick is to get out of them. I would also insert that it's not only thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. There are very many little subtle things, like, for example, sensation. And we have a question over there: how do I know I'm activated? It's your physical state, it's sensations you sense in your body when you're tight, when you're like your heart is pumping, your throat is kind of like a lump in the throat or whatever, and like your face goes like angry or sad. It also a work of your nervous system. It's how it's activated into some difficult state. And so one thing is to break the cycle is to change some place, some point of this cycle. For example, like making up with someone, but not the abuser. Okay, you probably will sometime talk about those people who push your red buttons on purpose and abuse you, is so you don't have to make up with the abuser.
Yeah.
But okay, let's say it's just a misunderstanding takes place. Your withdrawal means that you try to put yourself into a space, a safe place, a safe space, because you think that this person hurts you, and so you withdraw, and you get offended. But if you think a bit deeper, that probably this person didn't want to try to offend you, or didn't mean to be rude to you, you can at least go back. You can change your behavior, and from turn from the withdrawal to connection, at least to make things clear. It's not like, okay, let's make up, but okay, what was that? Make sure, well, you misunderstood, and maybe the person was trying to hurt you, and you, while talking to them, you uh, make things clear, and you make clear that you don't like it, and you can ask not to repeat these things anymore, and it's a change of a pattern. You have to break the pattern. And concerning like sensation, for example, muscle tension, or breathing too hard, or having a lump in the throat, there are tools, like, again, calming down your breath, or maybe having some time spent on a relaxation technique, or taking a shower, or taking a massage or something, and already your state turns to somewhat more comfortable state, and it's easier for you to go and talk to the person, or to undertake any other activity
Yeah.
to get you back on track.
Yeah. I mentioned that there's a couple of tools, and these are really simple. They're used for other things as well, but they do work in relation to triggering. So one of them is find a vent partner. So a person who you can have a really good vent to. I used Leo a couple of days ago to have a vent about something something work related. And I felt so much better afterwards. I really did. I felt great, because my little head wouldn't unravel what was going on up here. And Leon had said a couple of things, and suddenly the unravel happened, and it was all good. I'm not saying that it's going to fix triggers that well, but having a vent with somebody you trust at least enables you to say what you're feeling. So you're not internalizing it. Thoughts, feelings, behaviors, remember that stuff. But saying it to another people enables you to clarify some of those thoughts. Perhaps even dilute some of the thoughts to something less harmful. So a good venting session can be helpful. It's worth thinking about. Another one is based on, sorry, Leo, go on, carry on.
Oh, just had if there's nobody or you don't trust the person on venting your things to them, journaling and expressive writing are very approved techniques that help you to put it out from inside outside, and that helps processing a lot.
Yeah, that's a great method. I've got two books. One's personal, one's work related that I journal in. So they're a good idea. Another one is about the five senses. So the senses of see, touch, hear, smell, and taste. So when you feel that something's triggered you, and you're feeling uncomfortable, clammy hands, sore throat, whatever you feel, look immediately, focus on your breathing, and look for 5 things you can see. Doesn't matter what they are. I can see more than 5 things around me, but just pick 5 things that you can see. And then choose 4 things that you can touch, and go touch them. Bottle on my desk, notepad on the other side, and so on. So find 4 things that you can touch. So it's 5 for see, 4 for touch. 3 things that you can hear. I can hear the wind outside. I can hear my laptop fan at the moment. I need to focus, but I can't hear much else, but there'll be something else if I think about it. 2 things that you can smell. 2 things. And 1 that you can taste. So you may want to pick something up and taste it, or you've got something already in your mouth, some gum or whatever. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, see, touch, smell, taste. That doesn't fix the triggers. It's not meant to fix the triggers. It just enables you to ground yourself and bring you back to the present moment. Because it's in the present moment where we can begin to find solutions for the things that are harming us. These things do harm us sometimes. We don't want that. Obviously, we want to take some positive action if we can. So, Leo, we've got a couple of minutes. Would you like to?
Yes, I want to mention, and probably this is something I will repeat all over again all the time. It's you have to be repetitive. All these little things that we recommend, or you get on the web, like breathing or relaxing or using your 5 senses or whatever the exercises and tools may be, they are not any magic pills. You have to train your body to stick to them. Like if you go to a gym regularly, maybe in short sessions, but regularly, your muscles grow. But if you just sit one time and breathe, probably it won't help you the first and even the 10th time, especially in the middle of a rant or in the of your breakdown, because you have to build it up, and again build a toolkit for yourself with these, because not there is no particular type of breathing, just some aspects of it. There is no particular school of yoga that helps you with this and the other one doesn't. There is no particular type of therapy. There's something a little bit from everything that suits just you. It's your personal like toolkit or bouquet, like your personal ikebana of things.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I have a toolkit of mindfulness tools that I use with my clients. So they're all written up very neatly on a big Word document. There's over 300 of these things on this Word document that I've collected over a long time. Some of them work for me fantastically. Some of them absolutely not. They just don't work.
True.
You know, or I don't enjoy them, or whatever. You know, so it's all about you. It's all about the person, the individual. That's what we're concerned with. Okay. Well, I think that's all we have time for today. It's been brilliant to be here with you again, Leo. Really nice. And we'll see you again. Leo will see you next week. I won't. But we'll both see you the week after.
Get your questions ready.
Yeah, get them in. Give him a tough time. Make him work. Okay, thank you. And goodbye, everybody.